Given that, even if you're the best, there's always a chance of failure. So I think it's important that you really like whatever you're doing.
Never.
Why not?
I don't ever give up. I'd have to be dead or completely incapacitated.
Really liking what you do, whatever area that you get into, given that, even if you're the best, there's always a chance of failure. So I think it's important that you really like whatever you're doing. If you don't like it, life is too short. If you like what you're doing, you think about it even when you're not working. I mean, it's something that your mind is drawn to, and if you don't like it, you just really can't make it work, I think.
So many people tried to talk me out of starting a art company. It was crazy. One good friend of mine collected a whole series of videos of rockets blowing up and made me watch those. He just didn't want me to lose all my money. We're doing these things that seem unlikely to succeed, and we've been fortunate, and at least thus far they have succeeded. Now is the time to take risk. You don't have kids. As you get older, your obligations increase. So and once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that before you have those obligations. So I would encourage you to take risks now. Do something bold. You won't regret it.
How did you figure you were going to start a car company and be successful at it?
Well, I didn't really think Tesla would be successful. I thought we would most likely fail. But I thought that we at least could address the false perception that people had that an electric car had to be ugly and slow and boring like a golf cart.
But you say you didn't expect the company to be successful, then why try?
If something's important enough, you should try, even if the probable outcome is failure. Focus on signal over noise. A lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. For example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible. I think that's the way to go. For any given company, just keep thinking about, are these efforts that people are expending, are they resulting in a better product or service? And if they're not, stop those efforts. When I interview someone to work at the companies, would be to ask them to tell me about the problems that they worked on and how they solved them. And if someone was really the person that solved it, they'll be able to answer multiple levels. They'll be able to go down to the brass tacks. And if they weren't, they'll get stuck. And then you can say, oh, this person was not really the person who solved it, because anyone who struggled hard with a problem never forgets it. If you're creating a company or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing, that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is, and the degree to which they are focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company. You've got to make sure that whatever you're doing is a great product or service. It has to be really great. And I go back to what I was saying earlier, where if you're a new company, I mean, unless it's like some new industry or new market that, if it's an untapped market, then you have more ability to, the standard is lower for your product or service. But if you're entering anything where there's
an existing marketplace against large entrenched competitors, then your product or service needs to be much better than theirs. It can't be a little bit better, because then you put yourself in the shoes of the consumer and they say, why would you buy it as a consumer? You're always going to buy the trusted brand unless there's a big difference. So a lot of times, you know, an entrepreneur will come up with something which is only slightly better. And it can't just be slightly better. It's got to be a lot better.
Depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hot up we had one computer, so the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night. 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, like, I mean, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say, particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, say like, okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company. Well, first of all, I'd say I actually think I feel fear quite strongly. So it's not as though I just have the absence of fear. I feel it quite strongly. But there are just times when something is important enough, you believe in it enough, that you do it in spite of the fear.
So speaking of important things,
like people shouldn't think people shouldn't think, well, I feel fear about this and therefore I shouldn't do it. It's normal to feel fear. Like there'd have to be something mentally wrong if you didn't feel fear.
So you just feel it and let the importance of it drive you to do it anyway.
Yeah, you know, actually, something that can be helpful is fatalism, to some degree. If you just accept the probabilities, then that diminishes fear. When starting SpaceX, I thought the odds of success were less than 10%, and I just accepted that actually probably I would just lose everything. But that maybe we'd make some progress if we could just move the ball forward. Even if we died, maybe some other company could pick up the baton and keep moving it forward, so that we'd still do some good. Yeah, same with Tesla. I thought the odds of a car company succeeding were extremely low. Would definitely advise people who are starting a company to expect a long period of quite high difficulty.
Yeah.
But I mean, as long as people stay super focused on creating the absolute best product or service that really delights their end customer, like if they stay focused on that, then if you get it such that your customers want you to succeed, then you probably will.
All right. You have to focus on the customer and delivering for them.
Yeah. Make sure if your customers love you, your odds of success are dramatically higher. It does have to be focused on the short term and money coming in when creating a company, because otherwise the company will die. So I think that a lot of times people think like creating a company is going to be fun. I would say it's not. It's really not that fun. I mean, there are periods of fun, and there are periods of where it's just awful. And particularly if you're the CEO of the company, you actually have a distillation of all the worst problems in the company. There's no point in spending your time on things that are going right. So you only spend your time on things that are going wrong. And there are things that are going wrong that other people can't take care of. So you have like the worst. You have a filter for the crappiest problem in the company, the most pernicious and painful problem. So I wouldn't say I think you have to feel quite compelled to do it, and have a fairly high pain threshold. And there's a friend of mine who says like starting a company is like staring into the abyss and eating glass.
And there's some truth to that. The staring into the abyss part is that you're going to be constantly facing the extermination of the company. Because most startups fail. It's like 90%, arguably 99% of startups fail. So, that's the staring into the abyss part. You're constantly saying, okay, if I don't get this right, the company will die. It can be quite stressful. And then the eating glass part is you've got to do the problems. You've got to work on the problems that the company needs you to work on, not the problems you want to work on. And so that's you end up working on problems that you'd really wish you weren't working on. And so that's the eating glass part. And that goes on for a long time.
So how do you keep your focus on the big picture when you're constantly faced with, we could be out of business in a month?
Well, it's just a very small percentage of mental energy is on the big picture. Like you know where you're generally heading for, and the actual path is going to be some sort of zigzaggy thing in that direction. And try not to deviate too far from the path that you want to be on, but you're going to have to do that to some degree. But I don't want to diminish the. I mean, I think the profit motive is a good one if the rules of an industry are properly set up. So there's nothing fundamentally wrong with profit. In fact, profit just means that people are paying you more for whatever you're doing than you're spending to create it. That's a good thing. and if that's not the case, then you'll be out of business, and rightfully so. You're not adding enough value. First of all, I really need to give some thought to how can I provide advice that would be most helpful, and I'm not sure I've given enough thought to that to give you the best possible answer. But I think certainly being focused on something that you're confident will have high value to someone else, and just being really rigorous in making that assessment, because people tend to, a natural human tendency is wishful thinking. So a challenge for entrepreneurs is to say, well, what's the difference between really believing in your ideals and sticking to them versus pursuing some unrealistic dream that doesn't actually have merit? And that is a really difficult thing to tell. Can you tell the difference between those two things?
Right.
You know? So you need to be sort of very rigorous in your self-analysis. I think certainly extremely tenacious, and then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week.
Gosh,
and
that's
then
a lot of work.
All those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve. Exactly. When you're building something new, there's going to be mistakes. Yeah. And it's important to recognize those mistakes, acknowledge them, and take corrective action. Oh. And the success of a company is very much more about how quick are you to fix the mistakes, not will you make mistakes.
Or admit the mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you see the difference between a startup that is successful and one that is not, and it's because the successful one, they both made mistakes, but the successful one recognized the mistakes, fixed them very quickly, and the unsuccessful one tries to deny that the mistakes exist.
Extremely smart people are sometimes quite arrogant because they believe in what they believe in, right? And so when they face criticism, it's less likely to admit, they can make mistakes. Was that in your case?
I learned it when I was studying physics. In physics, you're taught to always question yourself. You're taught to always assume that you're wrong, not assume that you're right, and you have to prove yourself not wrong. And so I think that physics framework is really where I learned it, and it's very effective for learning counterintuitive things that aren't obvious.
So you are very famous in saying that failure is actually an option, and if you're not failing, that means you're not innovative enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I like failure. I mean, who likes failure is terrible. But if you only do things that are certain to succeed, then you're only going to be doing very obvious things.
Well, I mean, I do use that phrase with our engineering and design team, that aspirationally we're in pursuit of the platonic ideal of the perfect car.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what that looks like actually, but you want to try to make every element of the car as flawless as possible. And there will always be, some degree of imperfection, but try to minimize that and create a car that is just delightful in every way. And I think if you do that, then the rest kind of takes care of itself.
I mean, I'd love to just do innovation and just do engineering, but you raise a good point, because a lot of life in general, in any job, there's like, you have to do your chores. There's
because nobody else can do that for you, right?
Well, I think to be successful at almost anything, you have to do the tough stuff and as well as the enjoyable stuff. You have to do the boring stuff as well as the non-boring stuff. And if you don't do your chores, then bad things will happen. But if they don't do the things that they don't like to do, then the company will be in trouble.
Yeah.
Like you have to, you basically, like it's more fun to cook the meal than to clean the dishes. Okay, but you need to clean the dishes.
You need to do both.
Yes, you need to do both, exactly.
2001, was touring a friend of mine, and he asked me what I was going to do after PayPal, and I thought, well, I was wondering, like, I'd like to get involved in space, but I just didn't think there was anything I could do as an individual, but I was curious as to when NASA would be sending a team to Mars, because that was always going to be the thing to do after the moon. I figured that there'd be some plan, and I'd just go to the website and I could read the schedule. And
Then Mars
like,
occurs.
oh yeah, it's like, okay, 2017, good, okay. But actually there wasn't anything on the website, and or at least I thought, like, can I not find it? Like, what's going on here? And is it secret? I don't know. But it turned out that that NASA had done a study on what it would cost to do a manned Mars mission, and this was under Bush the First, and in his first, he asked for a 90-day study shortly after taking office, and NASA came back with a $500 billion price tag, and he said, okay, maybe not.
Billion with a B.
That's when $500 billion was serious money for the government. So then that got totally shelved, and it was like you were not allowed to talk about any kind of crewed mission to Mars at NASA. Anyway, but I thought, well, if I could do something that would galvanize public interest, and then that public interest would translate to additional appropriations for NASA and increase their budget, then maybe they could do it. So actually, what I sort of thinking I would do is send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars with seeds in dehydrated gel, and then upon landing, hydrate the gel and grow the plants. And the public tends to respond to precedents and superlatives. So this would be the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on Mars. I tried to figure out how to do this with the proceeds that I had from PayPal. And I was able to figure out how to get the cost of the spacecraft down, and the communications, and the little greenhouse and everything. But the one thing I couldn't compress was the cost to launch, because there are only a few options. And the US options were way too expensive. And so I ended up going to Russia 3 times to try to buy the biggest ICBM in the Russian nuclear fleet.
That's where I'd start. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go big,
that
or
was,
go home. Right? Yeah.
I mean, okay. There was some strange trips, that's for sure. But there's like virtually, like, you can buy any. It's a very capitalist society in some ways. So I actually did negotiate a deal to buy 2 of the ICBMs minus the nukes. But I came to the conclusion after that 3rd trip that it wouldn't really matter. Like, I actually came to the conclusion that my initial premise was wrong, because I actually think there's a tremendous amount of will in the American population, particularly, to explore. The United States, maybe more than any other
country is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. And it's really fundamental to psyche. So if people think there's a way, I think it would actually get a lot of support. But it can't be just banging your head against the wall. You've got to believe that this can be done without breaking the federal budget. So that's when I said, okay, well, is there some way to affect the cost of space transport? And so I got together with a group of people over a series of Saturdays just to try to understand, is there something fundamentally super expensive about rockets, or can the cost be substantially improved? We had a bunch of those kind of brainstorming sessions, and I couldn't see any fundamental obstacle to improving the cost of rockets. So that's when I started SpaceX.
It's like, I'll just build them myself.
Yeah.
And then.
But like I said, at that point, I would say the probability of success was definitely less than 50%. I thought I would most likely not succeed, but it was worth a try.
Sure. Well, I think it's really a fundamental decision we need to make as a civilization. What kind of future do we want? Do we want a future where we are forever confined to one planet until some eventual extinction event, however far in the future that might occur? Or do we want to become a multi-planet species and then ultimately be out there among the stars and be among many planets, many star systems? And I think the latter is a far more exciting and inspiring future than the former. And Mars is the next natural step. In fact, it's the only planet we really have a shot at establishing a self-sustaining city on. And I think once we do establish such a city, there will be a strong forcing function for the improvement of spaceflight technology that will then enable us to establish colonies elsewhere in the solar system and ultimately extend beyond our solar system. And so there's the defensive reason of protecting the future of humanity, ensuring that the light of consciousness is not extinguished should some calamity befall Earth. But also, and that's the defensive reason. But personally, I find what gets me more excited is the fact that this would be an incredible adventure. I mean, it would be like the greatest adventure ever. And it would be exciting and inspiring. And there need to be things that excite and inspire people. Yeah. There have to be, reasons why you get up in the morning. It can't just be solving problems. It's got to be, something great's going to happen in the future. Yeah,
we talked about this at length yesterday. It's not an exit strategy or a backup plan for humankind when Earth fails. Right. It's also to inspire people on Earth, right, and to transcend and to go beyond our mental limits of what we think we can achieve. Right. I mean, you think of sort of how incredible the Apollo program was. And just, I mean, if you ask anyone and say, name some of humanity's greatest achievements of the 20th century, the Apollo program, landing on the moon, would in many, if not most places, be number one.
Yeah, the whole purpose behind Tesla, the reason I put so much of my time and money into helping create the business is we want to serve as a catalyst for accelerating the electric car revolution. The price of gas at the pump does not reflect the true cost of gasoline because you have a consumption of a public good. It's one of the most. It's really a common problem in economics. You have the same thing in fishing where, because there's no cost to fishing stocks, people just overfish and you have disaster that ensues. Right. And here we're not paying for the cost of the CO2 concentration in the oceans and atmospheres. We're not paying for all the ancillary effects of the wars and all the other things at the gas pump. So you effectively have a subsidy taking place at the gas pump because of that. So the only way to bridge that is with innovation, is to try to make electric cars better sooner than they would otherwise be.
Before we were able to get the Roadster out, then they'd say, well, you couldn't possibly make that car work. And then when we made the car work, they'd say, well, nobody's going to buy it. And then people bought it. And then we announced the Model S, and so many people called bullshit on that. It was ridiculous. And yet, actually, we were able to bring it to market. And then when we brought it to market, they said, well, you're never going to be able to produce it at volume. And we did that. And then they said, you will never be able to make a profit. And then we did that in Q1. So I'm hopeful that people will observe that there's a trend here. And so now that we have been profitable, I think other manufacturers are more likely to embark on electric vehicle projects.
I really need to give some thought to, like, how can I provide advice that would be most helpful? And I'm not sure I've given enough thought to that to give you the best possible answer. But I think certainly being focused on something that you're confident will have high value to someone else, and just being really rigorous in making that assessment, because people tend to, a natural human tendency is wishful thinking. So a challenge for entrepreneurs is to say, well, what's the difference between really believing in your ideals and sticking to them versus pursuing some unrealistic dream that doesn't actually have merit? And that is a really difficult thing to tell. Can you tell the difference between those two things?
Right.
You know? So you need to be sort of very rigorous in your self-analysis. I think certainly extremely tenacious, and then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100 hour weeks every week. And then
a lot of work.
All those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve. I do think there's a good framework for thinking is physics. The sort of first principles reasoning. I mean, generally, I think there are. What I mean by that is boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there, as opposed to reasoning by analogy. Through most of our life, we get through life by reasoning by analogy, which essentially means kind of copying what other people do with slight variations. And you have to do that, otherwise it's mentally you wouldn't be able to get through the day. But when you want to do something new, you have to apply the physics approach. Physics is really sort of figuring out how to discover new things that are counterintuitive, like quantum mechanics. It's really counterintuitive. So I think that's an important thing to do. This may sound like sort of simple advice, but it's hardly anyone does that, and it's incredibly helpful. Well, I've learned, I think, quite a lot. There's a lot of scar tissue between then and now. I think I've mentioned this at when I gave my talk at South by Southwest, but I think I've made several hiring decisions in the past where I valued intellect over heart, and I think that was a mistake. And so I've tried to adjust accordingly. It actually matters whether somebody's a good person, beyond just goodness itself. Right. Yeah. The ability to attract and motivate great people is critical to the success of a company, because a company is it's a group of people that are assembled to create a product or service. That's the purpose of a company. People sometimes forget this elementary truth, and so if you're able to get great people to join the company and work together towards a common goal, and you sort of have a relentless sense of perfection about that goal, then you will end up with a great product. And if you have a great product, lots of people will buy it, and then the company will be successful. Yeah. But really, it's pretty straightforward, really. I mean, yeah, that's the reason for it. Always be questioning your whatever idea you have, not from the standpoint of reducing confidence in it, but more to make sure it stands up to reason. If something does not stand up to reason, then it is probably false. And I think it's a good idea to solicit negative feedback from friends in particular, because friends are reluctant to tell you bad things.
even if they know it, you know. And it doesn't mean that they're right. They may very well be wrong, but sometimes they're right. And so if you have a product or service or whatever, you want to ask your friend, say, please tell me what you really think. You know, what do you really think is wrong here? And I won't be offended, and you'll still be my friend. And then they will tell you. If you look at the trajectory of space technology and progress, the pinnacle of that progress was around maybe 1969, 1970, you know, with the moon missions. And so we made incredible progress in the 60s, and then we were able to land on the moon. And then with the space shuttle, it could only get people to low Earth orbit. Now the space shuttle is retired, and that's just there's no trajectory of improvement. It's a trajectory to nothing. So, and I kept thinking that there'd be some plan to send people to Mars, because that's the obvious next step. And the actual origin of SpaceX is when I was, I think it was around 2001 or so, and I was visiting a friend of mine, Adeo Resi, who actually you may have met, but he lives in Palo Alto now. We were college housemates, and he asked me what I was going to do after PayPal, and I said, well, I've always been interested in space, but I didn't think that there was anything I could do in space as an individual. So my initial plan in space was actually to do a small mission to Mars with a greenhouse, essentially seeds and dehydrated nutrient gel in a little greenhouse that would land, and you'd hydrate the gel, and then you'd grow the plants, and you'd have this great shot of green plants on a red background, and that would be the money shot, essentially. And the people tend to respond to precedents and superlatives, and this would be the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on Mars, as far as we know. And that would get people excited. And I thought, well, that would result in an increased NASA budget, and then we could send people to Mars, because that's, you know, I think you want to have a future where you're expecting things to be better, not one where you're expecting things to be worse. So that was how things started out. And then as I learned more, and I went to, speaking of crazy things, went to Russia 3 times to negotiate a deal to buy a couple of the largest ICBMs in the Russian fleet. A strange experience.
How do you even get into that negotiation?
Well, you talk to people who know people, and pretty soon you're talking to the Russian rocket forces, and you know, they. It turns out Russia's quite a capitalist society, so, but it definitely has had some weird meetings. In places like that, I swear they looked like a sanitarium or something. I don't know. It was very odd.
We keep going back to the theme of crazy.
Yeah. Seriously, this place had padded walls. You're like, why do you have padded walls? It was weird. Yeah, and then there was some sort of Russian guy who was missing a front tooth started yelling at me. Because one of his front teeth was missing, it was like spit flying at me in a place with padded walls. I'm like, this is really bizarre.
What's happened to my life?
Right.
And that was the moment when you thought, I'm going to build my own rocket.
Yeah. That was probably when I got back from that 3rd trip, I was like, well, I realized that the real issue, the reason we haven't advanced in space is because the cost of space transportation has become unaffordable. You know, it's become more and more expensive to do less and less in space, and we really need to improve the technology of space transportation. So that's why I started SpaceX. But it may seem odd that I would start SpaceX with an expectation of failure, but bear in mind that my initial thing was to do essentially a philanthropic mission with a 0% chance of success from a financial standpoint. So it would have effectively been a donation to the cause. And so anything better than that is a win. Used up all you know, you invested $100 million, then still needed more money, and then there was the big recession of 2008 and 9, and in the end I had to invest everything, and I was borrowing money from friends to pay the rent.
You were on the edge of actually
I didn't even own a house.
You could have bought an island, and,
yes,
and just you could have sipped cocktails for the rest of your life. why did you want to take the risks involved in these businesses that you've gone into?
Well, I have to say, at times I've wondered, you know, I wondered if it was really the right choice, but it has actually been a very difficult journey, I have to say. Yeah. But I think there are certain important things that we must do in order for the future to be good. We must have sustainable energy. If we don't have that, the future is going to be terrible.
Were you a little naive when you thought, I can easily build an electric car and a rocket?
I didn't think it would be easy. Like I said, I thought they would probably fail. But you know, like, creating a company is almost like having a child. So it's sort of like, how do you say your child should not have food?
So once you have the company, you have to feed it and nurse it, and take care of it, even if it ruins you.
Yeah.
But suppose there were some tough times in 2008, end of 2008. How did you get through that period of crisis?
Yeah. Can we just break for a second?
Sure.
Well, he's certainly someone I've admired. Well, I did try to talk to him once at a party, and he was super rude to me. But I don't think it was me. I think it was off the course.
I think you weren't the first.
Yeah, not the first. No. Yeah, and I was actually there with, like, Larry Page is an old friend of mine. I've known Larry since before he got venture funding for Google, and Larry was the guy that introduced me to Steve Jobs. So it's not as like I'm going like and tugging on his coat, like, you know, please talk to me. But you know, so I was introduced by Larry Page. It's not bad. So, I mean, he obviously was an incredible guy and made fantastic products. You know, and I don't know, there was like a certain the guy had a certain magic about him. You know, just sort of. That was really inspiring. So, I mean, I think that's really great.
Is there that magic that you try and emulate?
No, I think Steve Jobs is way cooler than I am. So, you hear crazy things. Went to Russia 3 times to negotiate a deal to buy a couple of the largest ICBMs in the Russian fleet. A strange experience.
How do you even get into that negotiation?
Well, you talk to people who know people, and pretty soon you're talking to the Russian rocket forces, and you know, it turns out Russia's quite a capitalist society, so but it definitely had some weird meetings. In places that I swear they looked like a sanitarium or something. I don't know. It was very odd.
We keep going back to the theme of crazy.
Yeah. Seriously, this place had padded walls. You're like, why do you have padded walls? It was weird. Yeah, and then I had some sort of Russian guy who was missing a front tooth started yelling at me. Because one of his front teeth was missing, he was like spit flying at me in a place with padded walls. I'm like, this is really bizarre.
What's happened to my life?
Right.
And that was the moment when you thought, I'm going to build my own rocket.
Yeah. I sort of was thinking about this when I was a kid, and trying to find some meaning in life. Like, what's the meaning of life? You know. I got quite sort of sad about it actually when I was a teenager. And then I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which basically said like the real, you know, basically the universe is the answer, and you just need to figure out the questions. So I think, you know, that's if I can help kind of figure out the questions, then I consider that to be meaningful. I went into a store in South Africa and saw a Commodore VIC-20, and I guess maybe I was 9 years old, I don't know, somewhere at that time. And
I thought this was like the most awesome thing I'd ever seen, and you could like make this, write computer programs and make games, and I played Atari and other things, for other games, consoles, when I was like maybe 6 or 7. So the idea of being able to like create games I thought was really exciting.
I taught myself how to program computers when I was a kid, and bought my first computer when I was 10 and sold my first commercial program when I was 12. The strongest argument for us being in a simulation, probably being in a simulation, I think is the following. That 40 years ago, we had Pong, like 2 rectangles and a dot. That was what games were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have virtual reality, we'll have augmented reality. If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality, they'll be indistinguishable. Even if that rate of advancement drops by 1,000 from what it is right now, then you just say, okay, well, let's imagine it's 10,000 years in the future, which is nothing in the evolutionary scale. So given that we're clearly on a trajectory to have games that are indistinguishable from reality, and those games could be played on any set-top box or on a PC or whatever, and there would probably be, billions of such, computers or set-top boxes, it would seem to follow that the odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions.
So
tell me what's wrong with that argument.
Is the answer yes?
The argument is probably. I mean, but I just like, is there a flaw in that argument?
I mean, someone.
I'm not sure what the error.
No. The argument makes sense. So the assumption then is that somebody beat us to it, and this is a game.
No. There's a 1 in billions chance that this is base reality.
Oh, okay. What do you think?
Well, I think it's 1 in billions.
Okay.
I mean, that seems to be like clearly what it suggests.
Right.
And actually, I mean, arguably, we should hope that that's true, because otherwise, if civilization stops advancing, then that may be due to some calamitous event that erases civilization. So maybe we should be hopeful that this is a simulation, because otherwise...
Because they could reboot it.
Well, otherwise, either we're going to create simulations that are indistinguishable from reality, or civilization will cease to exist. Those are the 2 options. Well, first of all, I certainly don't think I can, do anything or do most things that people think are impossible. Because I think a lot of what people think is impossible is actually impossible. But occasionally it's not. I guess it's. I think I've said this before. I think it's helpful to have kind of a physics framework for looking at things. Do a first principles analysis, look for negative feedback, and like really believe in what you're doing, but not just from a blind faith standpoint. Like to have really thought about it and say, okay, this is true. I'm convinced it's true, and I've tried every angle to figure out if it's untrue, and sort negative feedback to figure out maybe if I'm maybe wrong. But then after all that, it still seems like this is the right way to go. Then that I think gives one a fundamental conviction and an ability to convey that conviction to others, and to convince them to join. And that's what a company is. It's a group of people who come together to create a product of some kind. And so if you can convey that and answer the concerns that people have, convince them that this is something that needs to be done, it's important, and here is a path to do it, even if that path has a lot of danger associated with it and risk, and maybe it
won't succeed. But people can understand, okay, this is why it's important, and even if the odds are that it won't succeed, it's worth trying to do it. Then I think you can create a great company. Well, I think it's important to have a very, to apply critical thinking to, this may sound trite, but to apply critical thinking to what one is doing. By that I mean just the fundamentals of logic, you know, do you have the right axioms? Are they relevant? And are you making the right conclusions based on those axioms? That's the essence of critical thinking, and yet it is amazing how often people fail to do that. I think wishful thinking is innate in the human brain. You want things to be the way you wish them to be, and so you tend to filter information that you shouldn't filter. That's the most common flaw that I see.